So I've just spent some time with the Little Nightmares free demo on both Switch 1 and Switch 2, and I've got to be honest, in relation to the Switch 2 build, I've walked away more confused than impressed. Nintendo and Bandai Namco are calling this a Switch 2 demo, but from what I've played, it feels much more like the old Switch 1 build just running with a bit of extra horsepower. And that's, well, for me, disappointing. Now, look, don't get me wrong, the game itself still has that unmistakable Little Nightmares atmosphere, and I do like what's here. But there's also a lot about this demo that just feels off, especially, again, in relation to the Switch 2 build. On Switch 1, I think it's kind of about what I expected. And before we do break it all down, I cover all things Nintendo here on the channel, and I'm pushing hard for 100k subscribers. So if you do enjoy this kind of content, a sub, it'd mean a lot. Alright, so look, in this video, I'm going to be breaking it down into the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. What works, what doesn't, and why I think this demo raises more questions than answers about the Switch 2 version of Little Nightmares 3. And before I do get into the details of the demo itself though, let's just talk quickly about what Little Nightmares 3 actually is. So if you're new to the series, these games are all about dark, twisted, fairy tale-like worlds, where you play as small, fragile characters trying to survive against, often at least, giant, grotesque enemies. They've always been more about atmosphere and tension than combat, and that formula has made them stand out in the horror space. This time around though, there's been a big shift behind the scenes. The original team that created the first two games, they've actually moved on to a new IP, Reanimal. It looks absolutely incredible. Little Nightmares 3, this has instead been handed to Supermassive Games, and personally, great studio, I adore their work. They are the studio behind Until Dawn, The Quarry, and the Dark Pictures anthology. Basically, this team, they've built their reputation on cinematic, choice-driven horror, so it's really interesting to see them now tackling something that is much more gameplay-orientated like this. So while it's still unmistakably a Little Nightmares game in tone, you can definitely feel the new studio DNA creeping in, especially with the addition of co-op, which is actually a first for the series. Now onto the demo itself, and what we've got here is basically a vertical slice of the experience. Now story-wise, it doesn't spell much out. You wake up in this strange world, you're controlling one of two characters that we know very little about, and you just start exploring. The reason, the purpose, I'd assume it's about escaping, but the game never actually says that. What it does do though is end on a really strong moment that got me wondering where it's all heading. My gameplay then is pretty much what you'd expect from Little Nightmares. The movement is still quite cinematic, meaning slightly drawn out animations, and now we've got co-op too. I didn't get to try it that way here, but I really like the idea of it, and even solo, you'll have that second character alongside you, so the puzzles are very much leaning on having two characters. The AI as well, actually very good. You also then get the classic series tension with enemies. In this demo, it's a giant-ass baby that just hunts you through the location. It is unsettling, it's weird, it's exactly what I want from the series. The big change though is the setting. Instead of the damp, claustrophobic interiors that we've seen in Little Nightmares 1 and 2, this feels like some kind of a desert nightmare. There's sand everywhere, there's broken bridges, there's strange structures in the distance. It's different, and I actually really like that shift. So yeah, basically, as a demo, I think it does a good job of really showing you what Little Nightmares 3 is about. And I really like the elements here, the gameplay, the world, the way it feels like an evolution for the series while still keeping that unsettling core. But here's the problem, and this is where things start to fall apart, because while I enjoyed the demo itself, the way it's been presented on Switch 2 just doesn't really add up. Well, let's start with the positive side of things first, and that's the Switch 1 build. Like, honestly, it's exactly what I expected from that hardware, and in some ways I'd argue they've done a solid job. Like, sure, the resolution, it's on the softer side, but the game is targeting 30 frames per second, and for the most part, it's hitting that. And you do get the usual compromises I think you'd expect, a bit of aliasing here and there, some minor popping, but nothing out of line with what we've seen from other Switch ports. Basically, it's the kind of sensible downgrade you'd expect to make this run on the original system, and it works. On Switch 2 though, this is where the questions start, namely, is this actually a Switch 2 build? Because visually, it's not much of a jump at all. The resolution is definitely sharper, there's no doubt about that, but the overall detail, it just barely feels like a step forward. Now, I've also played this demo on PlayStation 5, and that version is, well, honestly, night and day. And that's what doesn't add up for me. If Street Fighter 6, for example, can run on Switch 2 and look so close to its PS5 counterparts, then there's really no reason for Little Nightmares 3 to feel this drastically different. In fact, because of that, I'm going to be dropping a comparison video after this one, putting the Switch 2 side by side with the PS5. Don't know if that's the type of content people want on the channel, but I figured give it a shot, see what everyone thinks. But look, here are the big reasons I'm actually doubting this is a true Switch 2 build. First, on the Xbox and PlayStation, you get graphical options, performance or quality modes. On Switch 2, nothing. The frame rate then is still kept at 30 frames per second, exactly like Switch 1. And it's not even a clean lock either. The game suffers from micro stutters at points and some frame pacing issues. There's really no reason for this to be limited to 30 on the new hardware, especially when you factor in the problems I've discussed. You know, this should be running at 60 and holding it steady. Instead, the Switch 2 version currently, I think it runs worse than the Switch 1 build. Then there's the grain effect. On PS5, on Xbox, even Switch 1, the image is clean. On Switch 2, for some reason, they've slapped on this incredibly aggressive grain filter, and yeah, you can't turn it off. Now on Switch 1, I think it would actually make sense, you know, mask the aliasing. But here, on Switch 2, it just makes no sense at all. It just muddies up the image. Finally then, the darkness. This game, of course, leans into shadows. But on Switch 1 and 2, the image here really struggles. Blacks often look more like grey, and picking at objects in the environment, it's just way harder than it should be. Adjusting the brightness then, well, it just doesn't help. It just washes the image out instead. It's a weird issue, and it's not present on other platforms. Put all of this together though, the 30 FPS cap, the heavy grain filter, the washed out blacks, and I think it points to one conclusion. It doesn't feel like a dedicated Switch 2 build. It feels more like the Switch 1 version upscaled to basically take advantage of that extra horsepower with, I guess, I don't know, a filter for some reason that I just can't, make any sense of. So basically, what I'm saying here is there's a good game here. I have no doubt about that. I'm genuinely excited about the new direction. And as a fan of Supermassive, there are plenty of reasons for me to be optimistic about Little Nightmares 3. But yeah, this demo, honestly, for the Switch 2 build, it's left me with more concerns than confidence. There are just too many issues. A 30 FPS cap that still struggles with stutters, a visual upgrade that's really barely noticeable outside of resolution, and then again, heavy grain filter that actually hurts the image, because this should be a stunning world, and that really does it some serious damage. It really is though a series I'm rooting for, and if you're playing on Switch 1, I think you're going to be happy. But if this really is the Switch 2 version, it's not the showcase I think Nintendo or Bandai Namco want it to be. And it's certainly not reflective of the demo trailer Nintendo dropped recently, which frankly, it looks like a different game altogether. It's much closer to the PS5 build. Now that trailer's on screen right now, and I really hope this is the true Switch 2 version, and that this demo is just a case of poor marketing or poor communication, and what we actually see here is the Switch 1 build just running on the hardware. Unfortunately, however, I did a few checks, and when I do check the in-game information, it does clearly say this is a Switch 2 version. So yeah, basically concerned. Alright, so if you found this breakdown useful, consider hitting subscribe. I cover all things Nintendo here on the channel, and as always, cheers for watching.